and welcome to the latest part of my French cinema season. We're in the 70s now, and I've plumped for Chantal Akerman's Jeanne Dielman, 23, which is 23, I think. Quai de Commerce, 1080, which is 1080, Bruxelles. And obviously, this is a Belgian film. And it was brought up by Steve in the comments last time that maybe it doesn't fit French cinema season. I didn't put any limits on what it was, but it does come up in the list of French films when you're picking per decade and you're thinking what to pick. It does come into that field. So whether it's French language or, as is most cases, who actually finances the film or where the finance comes from, the production comes from, seems to be where people classify where the cinema, or the piece of cinema is from. For instance, Milos Forman's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest isn't anything other than a Hollywood movie. Anyway, pedantic semantics doesn't matter. We are here to talk about what can only be described as a really peculiar and interesting film. And it's a film that's impossible to talk about in totality without discussing spoilers. So I'm really going to aim this at people that have seen the film. If you're looking for a should you watch it, I don't know actually. It depends on your history and how you feel about long cinema. How you feel about films like A Brighter Summer Day. How you feel about something like A Touch of Zen. These things that are longer and more epic in scale. And maybe go watch one of those, because if you find that you like that, I think that you'll find that you like this. Because I think the beauty of this longer form of cinema, or this longer runtime, is that you really get a feel for who the characters are, because you get to see more of their everyday actions. You get to see more of what way they behave as a norm, and not just in dramatic settings. So our central character is a woman who lives in solitude. Now, she does have a son that lives with her, and there does seem to be a respectful love in that relationship, but I don't think you'd ever classify it as warm. When they eat together, they eat in silence. He's told to eat with manners, reading at the table, put the book down, concentrate on your eating. The respect even goes both ways. The son waits for the mother to eat before they both clean up. So they are not ships that pass in the night. They are there in each other's company and making time for each other. But the son is very much more, or acts very much more like a father figure in the house, reading the paper, waiting for his dinner to be set down in front of him. The very traditional setting of maybe 70s life. So this longer form film of 3 hours plus really gives you a chance to see the minutiae that change over the course of its runtime. So we have a character, Jeanne Dielman, who is a woman who goes about her business and seems to have a very set routine. She seems to have a very set pace in life. The only things that seem disrupted are how she seems to earn her money, which is occasionally sleep with men. It seems to be doing a bit of money on the side. And she's not glamorous or otherwise. These men that come in to visit her certainly aren't glamorous at all. They come in, she has that portion of her life segmented off, then they leave, and she goes back about her business. And you can see this in numerous examples within the film. There's a scene where they show her making what is a bit of veal that's already been cut, sliced, butterflied open, and she coats it in the flour, the egg, put the breadcrumbs on. It's very much a systematic process. But it shows somebody that's meticulous about detail and somebody that's very prepared. Having cut and butterflied the veal already, having the stations laid out, going through the process, and we get to see all of this. And for some people, in cinematic terms, that's torture. But it gives you a feel for the rhythm, and it gives you a feeling for who they are as a person. And that totally pays off in the long run, because it's when things slightly deviate from that time that you feel it. You feel this change of meter, you feel the change of pace in the film, and you feel that something's just not quite right. And it builds slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly until the conclusion of the film. So everybody who watches this may see something a bit different, and in fact, upon multiple watches of this film, you may find that you see a different bit of it. And in the watches that I had, there are a couple of things that stand out. There's ones that I've read about the dropping of cutlery. that don't seem to happen. They don't seem to be part of her makeup as a person, to be clumsy, or to be, foolhardy and rushed in how she's doing things. If you contrast the veal making bread and exercise to cutting potatoes, later on she starts to stab at the potatoes. They seem to be irregular cuts that she's trying to make. They seem to be something not quite right. Again, you can contrast this with our relationships with other people. We don't really see very many other people, as I say, but there are interactions with other people. A rap comes at the door. She opens the door and somebody leaves their baby to be with her, to mind while they go off and do something. She brings the baby in, sets it in a place, and checks on it now and again, but is never maternal. It never interrupts from her day-to-day business or what she is aiming to do. It's not that she's neglective of the child. She's just not as attentive as somebody with maternal instincts she'd suspect to be. Even when the baby's handed back, she stands at the door and has a conversation with the person, but it's very much a one-way conversation from the other person. She holds the door in such a way that you are sure that the person is never going to be invited in. It's very much held at a state of readiness, so that when the natural conclusion of the conversation comes, she can just go on about her business. And that's really interesting, that you see that side of her, that you see those parts of her life, and that when that interaction's done, she goes back and returns to her routine. She seems to be constantly on the move. There doesn't seem to be any time for reflection or relaxation, or any time for herself to really stop and think about what's happening in her life. And so it comes when her routine falls out of sequence that the whole thing starts to devolve for her. Like I say, there are signs, I think, beforehand, and there are signs that you can pick up on as a viewer. But when she wakes up early, or she doesn't wake up a regimented time, she has time to sit and think. She's forced into a state where she has to stop and think about her life. And this is where I'm interjecting what I think of the character and what I think happens, because I think it's just this disruption in a routine, and the disruption in a routine might have happened beforehand to cause her to wake up early, but it's the act of waking up early that really sets in. This then leads to the chain effect. And here we come to the end part of the film. And this is what is truly shocking, I think, in the context of the film, in that she meets a male client and she climaxes with him. And whether in disgust, or whether because she's just had enough, or it breaks the mondanity or makes her think, that cuts an edge in both her thinking and her life, and she murders him quite viciously. And the film doesn't dramatise it with the swelling of music or anything. It's just very much matter of fact in the same way. You're seeing with her cutting the potatoes beforehand, and here she takes the scissors, and non-graphically, I think, although you can definitely see the after effects of, we see the murder. And it's a fascinating piece of film, because I think it documents life. Up until that moment, it is very much life. You see the ups and downs, or maybe the mundanity of life, and how this woman, and maybe all women, were fitting into this rhythm, or this bit of life. And it's for you, the viewer, to look at it and say, God, did you see what happens? And I think for most people, that you don't see the end coming, because it doesn't seem to be in her character. She's not an obvious psychopath or a sociopath or any of those things. This is something that just happens. You could even call it a crime of passion, if you want. The filmmaking itself is interesting, because there's a lot, and most of the films, in fixed camera shots. So the camera's set in place, and we just watch from one angle, or occasionally a two-shot of the action that happens. And it's sort of reminiscent of like a very early stage Wes Anderson kind of framing, where everything seems to be placed in frame for you to see, and in a certain perspective. In the scenes where they eat, right throughout, there's a flashing blue light, or a flashing light that comes in the background, and to me that was like a portent of the police light flashing, although it was almost certainly a neon light outside, or otherwise, or a shop light that was doing, but there was like a portent there that something was to come. And so it's no surprise that actually I think this film's brilliant, in the same way that I think those films I mentioned before are brilliant. A Brighter Summer Day. Again, very similar in theme, and watching the two side by side, you can see very strong parallels. At what point did you see that there was a change? Was it preordained from the start? Did an event happen in the middle that flicked the switch? What was it about it? And these are the real intricacies and the bits in the film that you really have fun identifying, I think. And it's the bit that makes it all the more interesting. I mean, Akerman talks about in some of the interviews that watch about what her intents in the movie were, but I think more so than anything, I think this is a film that you, as the viewer, and because of the time that you invest in it, you can get your own meaning out of it and see what you think. Now, obviously, the runtime mean that it's not for everybody, especially when it's a runtime that not a lot happens, other than the mundanity of life. You don't even get to see too much interaction between people in it. It's very much about observing, about being a voyeur. That is my episode of the 70s for French cinema season. I'm sure there are lots of thoughts on this film. Please give them to me in the comments. I'm sure there are lots of different takes and a lot of different things that people think about this film, and it'll be lovely to hear what you think. Up next, we're into the 80s. And the 80s, as a decade of French cinema, are somewhat lacking. Or it seems to me anyway. So I was left with a couple of choices. I think I hadn't done any Agnès Varda. I could go down that road, but I decided to go and delve into my collection and pick something that I hadn't seen that seemed to be of a very different style or thought to what we've just talked about. And we're going to go for Life is a Long Quiet River from 1988. Something that I hope will not be quite as lengthy or intense, but will give me plenty to talk about on the far end. Thank you very much for watching if you've made it this far, and take care of yourself, and I'll speak to you soon.